Okay. All right. And good morning, Pam. All right. It is 7:30. So I am going to officially call to order the meeting of the Municipal Light Board for today, February 9th. And in terms of sort of updates, just want to acknowledge to the public that we are definitely behind in our minutes. We are making a concerted effort to work through those and hope to have more minutes for review. In the meantime, we are making sure that all the videos are available to the public. So please use those on our Minuteman network in the interim, but hopefully February we'll have more minutes to review. Pam, I see you, but you're on mute. So just a comment.
Just, I wanted to reiterate a request and suggestion I made to you in an email, which is that the director's report be provided in writing. I think that makes things easier for the people taking minutes, but it's also a very good record. It's an important document, and it's a good record to have from the voice of the director. So I request that we do that going forward in the future.
So Dave and I had that conversation, Pam, and I believe that Dave's committed to providing that information.
Yeah, it's a non-issue for me. That's the way it's done anyway. Yeah, I can provide that.
Okay, I was under that, Dave. Thank you very much. I was under the misimpression that it was all done just by just recording what you said, but that's really great. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
And Dave, can you provide that in the meeting information prior to the meeting? Or is this something you can do after the fact?
I can do it either way. One of the I think the board will want to know is that it might get updated. So if I send it out on Friday, there could be more come the meeting time. So,
you generally have a lot to cover, so it might be good to see some text next to it so that you can get through it and we can ask our questions at the end.
Yep.
Great.
So can I just, as a point of clarification, would the board prefer to see it early, knowing that it will get updated, or is it okay to see it like the night before? Dave,
my preference would be real time, the most up to date, and whatever also helps Dave. But I understand Brian's point. That's a good point. But I'm okay with. I just want to have written material that I can look at the meeting, and also that can help the person writing the minutes.
Yeah,
and the public for that matter.
I don't mind if small changes are made. I'd rather have it before the meeting.
Okay.
Can I just, Dave, whatever's logical for you.
Okay.
So for me, it would be ideal to do it, on Monday or Tuesday before the meeting, just so I'm giving you a partial and then adding a bunch to it.
Sounds good.
All right, great.
Just on the subject of drafting the minutes, I think I have found, I've done minutes over many years for actually more than one committee. I found that there's an expectation of using fairly formal language. It's Mr. Brockway said, etc. Also an expectation that informal, that using the first person seems informal. Actually, when you try to put these into a form that seems right. And the problem with that is if you start with a draft where it's basically quoting someone, and they said, we're gonna trim the trees, then to get it out of that first person format, you need to really completely rewrite the grammatical structure of the sentence. And that takes a fair amount of time. So what I propose is that, let's use the director's report as an example. The minutes would start out by saying, Mr. Wood delivered the following director's report, and then allow the first person there, because actually what you're essentially doing, it's a block quote that lasts as long as the report, right? The other reason for not liking first person is because, I'm sorry, this is taking forever, but is that it's sometimes unclear. When the minutes say we are going to do something, someone reading the minutes doesn't know actually who just made that commitment. So it's much better to say that, Mr. this or Mrs. that committed to do something. You see what I mean? But if it's enclosed in a block where it's clear who the we is or who the I is, then we could just skip that wordsmithing and just try and get these things done more quickly. They don't have to be verbatim transcripts of the event. And it's okay to take a back and forth where a bunch of different views were exchanged and then something came out of that to basically just summarize.
Right. So Gordon, thank you for that. I think we've had several conversations in the last several months around trying to improve the summarization, if you will, of the minutes rather than a verbatim comment. So thanks for those comments. And I'm trusting Karen is on and she's hearing these, and we'll continue to improve the process. So, but thank you for those comments.
Did we lose Alice?
I'm here.
Oh, you're under iPhone. Okay.
Unfortunately, it seems like this conference room I'm in has no Wi-Fi at the moment.
Oh,
Sorry.
I wanted to give everybody a heads up. I'm on for this month to do the minutes, and I don't know if I'm going to succeed, but I'm going to try to do something that's much more pared down, and really just covers the main points. I think verbatim attempts at a colloquy approach is like really not useful. So bear with me. I'm going to give it a shot. Maybe I'll end up making them quite long, but I'm going to try not to.
Well, thank you, Pam. And I just want to acknowledge, I know that Gordon is participating on outside committees, and while he's clerk, we've really asked the other board members to step in and help with minutes. So Pam, thank you very much for that. And Alice is taking on 2 sets of minutes as well. So thank you both for that. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to move on to the chair's report. Just a couple updates in terms of the agenda and planning going forward. We mentioned last month that we were going to start discussions around rate philosophy, and that was actually in the context of a couple goals that the board set a year ago, was really to move forward with our strategy, our long-term strategy. And as many of you know, that strategy was drafted October 2017. It was for 2018 through 2025. We're now 4 years into that strategy. And so one of the things that we're going to do also in the context of rates, but next month, I'm asking Dave that we dedicate time to revisiting our strategy and the key components of that strategy, because we did commit as a board that we would do that. And in particular, we need to make sure that all our sustainability goals are included in that as well. So it's a good touch point for the board to remind ourselves what was in that strategy, to touch base on the progress of our strategy. And Laura's done a great job maintaining sort of the major milestones of that strategy on the website. So I encourage you to look at that. But I think we're going to have a more focused discussion next month on that, because we do need to be grounded in our larger milestones and know sort of longer term where those key milestones are, not just for next year, but over the next 4 or 5 years. So we think that's a good grounding for this group.
Wendy, could you just you refer to the strategy? Just the strategy we're referring to exactly is.
So the board hired a consultant several years ago and put together a CMLP strategy for 2018 through 25. And if you don't have that, Pam, we will make sure that you get that. I think.
No, I have that. I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear about this. I understand. Yep. I knew myself. I just wanted to. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then the graphic, which is a high-level summary of those milestones, is on the website. So maybe we'll use that as a guide to walk through sort of updates on the strategy. But also, we want to make sure that we're covering components of the strategy that a year ago we said we wanted to make sure we thoroughly included. So for example, all elements of the sustainability program are in there, including solar targets, et cetera. So we need to just ground ourselves on what commitments we're making as a board, right? So in that vein, there's obviously, and also we need to recognize that the world is changing, right? So we have the new CMS building project that's been approved. We have a commitment on solar for that project. That ought to be part of our strategy. So we need to refresh it to include that milestone as well. And obviously our rating strategy our rating discussions today are part of our longer term strategy around AMI in general. So we're continuing our commitment on the rating evaluation today. And so Laura, just recognizing, Laura did send out a summary of those 4 key rate topics that we as a board really want to review thoroughly. And we want to do that to make sure that we're aligned with our longer term AMI implementation schedule. So today we're going to take on the first topic around the question about our tiered structure versus our time of use strategy that we've been talking about for a long time, but we're going to reaffirm our approach to that today. And as part of that discussion, we have to acknowledge our discussion around opt-out and whether residents will be allowed to opt out. So again, our goal is to sort of walk through in entirely that topic. And if we need more discussions, we will. I'll just acknowledge that we're not at this time going to have additional meetings. We'll set them up if we need to. So we'll start with this discussion today. In March, we'll have a strategy discussion, and then we'll pursue additional rate topics after that. And if we choose to have additional meetings, we'll do that and we'll discuss it in March if we think that that's going to be necessary. Okay. All right. So I think that's that. And just, I know, Dave, you'll talk about the CMS project, but just want to acknowledge that I know that the CMS solar project is key. Everyone wants an answer of what our plan is. I think the expectation is that we need a plan for the plan. So I think we expect to have more information on our planning in next month's meeting. So Dave, I'm sure you'll probably touch base on that, but that would be just setting expectations for everyone around that. So clearly an important project that we'll get there. Okay. All right. So with that, Dave, I'm going to turn over to you for your update.
So we're just going to do a little shift here. I'm going to do my update, and Greg's not going to be with us today, so I'm going to do the broadband update together, and then we can flop and put the director's vote for the ENI board after that, if that's okay.
Yep, that's fine. Thanks for the reminder.
All right. On Monday, January 31st, the Department of Public Utilities issued an order in response to the investor-owned utilities proposed Mass Save 2022 to 2024 energy efficiency plan. The Mass Save sponsors are in the process of reviewing the order and how it will affect programs moving forward. The sponsor will look to provide an official update during the week of this week, February 7th. However, for some of the requirements of the order, it may take longer to understand the impact on the program's offerings. It's not clear at this time how the order will affect the proposed heat pump rebates to Concord households that currently heat with natural gas, but switch to heat pumps. So more to come on that. On Friday, we're gonna be reviewing our COVID operating procedures and protocols. As you may recall, we implemented a bit more remote work for the last 4 to 5 weeks. We have had each division staffed in the office, but the numbers have been lower. We did that to protect the employees from the rise in COVID. Given the numbers are coming down, I expect we'll be bringing more employees back in and doing less remote work. The office is currently open from 10 to 3, Monday to Friday, and we expect we'll be expanding those hours to be open to the public as well. Now that the Concord Middle School project is approved, we'll be moving into the next phase of that project. So Amanda and I will be setting up a meeting with Solar Design Associates to establish a plan, as Wendy just mentioned, design, as well as a number of other items. So there'll be more information to come as the meetings move forward, but now we'll really start digging into that. On the power supply to things, we have a few different carbon-free options that we're looking at. May have mentioned the Broadleaf solar project that's located in Connecticut. It's just over 100 megawatts, and we're one of 18 participants in that. Similarly, there's another solar project in New Hampshire. It's about 109 megawatts, and we'll be one of 18 or 20 participants as well. Both of those projects will generally get about 3% of our needs from. Sometimes it'll get up to around 4%, but it really depends on how many participants. So, you know, another couple good solar options for us, and we're excited about. late last week, we notified that our grant application for the level 3 charging station was approved, which is very exciting for us. The plan is to install this charging station at the Ride Out Playground parking lot and relocate the existing level 2 station probably over on Stowe or Everett Street near the Emerson Field. So the grants, since this is going to be on public property, we'll fund 100% of the project up to $100,000. So, it's really, really good news. We're really excited about it. On the broadband side, I'm pleased to announce that our candidate for the 4th technician has accepted the job, and we have established a start date of March 7th. So that'll bring a full complement of fiber technicians on board just before we get out of the winter months. So timing is very good on that. Technicians have started the installation of the fiber on the Mill Run project, which is located next to Riverbend. There will be 14 units there, and we currently have 6 that have requested service. We expect more to come as the structures are built. So, kind of working through things, a little bit challenging with the cold weather, and there's been some frozen pipes, but we've been able to work through that. The next 2 big projects are Barkus Farm and Tanglewood. The team was planning on starting Barkus Farm next. I asked them yesterday to go out and inspect the handles to see if they could actually access them with the amount of ice that we got in the last storm. If they can't get into the handles right now, they'll move on to the Tanglewood Drive project and then come back to Barkus Farm. One of the issues I think I mentioned previously is fiber right now with the supply chain issue. We're getting low on 2-strand fiber, and we got a quote of 52 weeks. So we really started searching suppliers, and we found some, and so we'll have ample supply by next week, which is great. Because obviously the 52-week lead time is not going to benefit us, but so we'll have about 40,000 feet showing up next week. Expanding our GIS application access and mapping capabilities to better capture field data and have it ready and available for our techs has been a project that's been ongoing, and we're looking forward to that. It's a great tool, and we've been working with consultants on that. And the last thing is we increased our bandwidth available to our customers on January 21st. One of our 3 links was increased to 10 gigabytes per second. And so now we have 2 service providers at 10 gig. So that's really good for us. Our peaks are continue to increase, and we want to make sure we have available capabilities. Should one go down, we have the same amount of bandwidth on the other one. And it's the way you're supposed to do things. We do the same thing on the electric side to make sure you have the same capacity. So we consider that firm capacity, and that's my update. Any questions?
I have a question, Wendy.
Yeah, I was muted. Sorry, Brian. Thanks. Go ahead.
So early in your update, you mentioned that the middle school project is moving forward and that you're going to reach out to Solar Design Associates. They're going to have pretty specific questions, and my concern is about the telephone game with SDA talking to you, you talking to the committee talking to the architect. Will there be a meeting of SMMA and Solar Design Associates so that Solar Design Associates can early in the process express their desires for the project and the solar relation?
Yeah, there will be. That's not the first step, but it is a step early on that needs to happen.
Okay.
So the first step is for us to get with them and kind of go through the whole thing, get some of the details hashed out. And then you're absolutely right. The players need to be involved so that we're not making decisions in a vacuum, so to speak. So that will happen, Brian.
Great. That's it. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Looks like Alice has a question.
Yeah, no, I was just looking at the phone. Yep, that's Alice. Alice,
Sorry, as soon as I get Wi-Fi back up here, I'll go on video. So I was looking at my notes when I was doing the minutes for November, and I just want to remind us that we had scheduled a discussion on, we hadn't scheduled, we tabled a discussion saying we should do this in an upcoming meeting. And I don't think we've heard much about it, but it comes into play when we think about the solar project at the middle school. My notes had indicated that we were to discuss the issue of solar saturation. And so that's something I think we need to also address either from Dave's update or maybe a board discussion to understand what does that mean and what are the implications for the middle school, perhaps other places. So that was just because I was doing minutes. I noticed that this is an open item for us.
thanks, Alice. I think it's part of our strategy discussion because we do have risks and the board needs to review it. So we'll include it in that discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. All right, Pamela Dritt, I understand you have a question. Can it be brief? We usually take questions at the end, but.
I just wanted to know if the plan is to maximize the amount of solar we can get at the junior high school, because in addition, we'll have storage. And if not, why not? Because we got to get more solar.
We understand. Dave, can you just speak quickly to our process here? I understand we need to balance sort of the financing and the design. So how much solar will be worked through in the design phase, my understanding.
Yeah, we know what the maximum capability is on the site based on the feasibility design, and how much actually gets built out there is the next step. Or the next step in terms of what we do. There's a bunch of different things here. We know that the town meeting article is looking for net zero for the building. Maximizing the capabilities of the site is also a possibility. And then we, like you said, Wendy, we have to balance the financial piece. All of that's in consideration, but no determination's been made at this point as to how much is going out there.
So I think that's the focus of our future meetings. The board has to understand what the design process and the key decisions are. And so we will work this through in future meetings as expected. Pam?
it's going to sound redundant, but I'm going to reiterate your point and maybe amplify it. We need a very real path of 30,000 foot decisions, policy decisions, in the weeds decisions that the light board needs to make on the middle school. And I just want to see clarity on how we are going to go through the decision process with the points that we have to be engaged in, which I think are considerable. And I'm actually concerned, worried about this because we have talked about it for a long time. And I guess the specific ask would be a sort of critical path, process for us, and to get it much more concrete, because it's been sort of out there, and I think the board is not really up to speed where it should be on some of these big issues. So I'm just reiterating your point, but I'm also want to emphasize that we need a very specific critical path sort of chart or action plan or something for the board on this very, very important project.
And Pamela, to that point, I think I hear you, but the thing I think you need to understand is that we weren't going to do any of that until it was approved, right? Other than approved.
I get you. I hear you, Dave. I hear you. But I don't think I agree necessarily that you need to have that kind of stuff completely laid out before you start actually thinking about the big issues. I'm sorry. I just disagree with that. I think there are things we need to be talking about.
So, Pam, I think actually I would like to defer this. We do know it's important. We know there's issues that need to be reviewed. The focus for next month will be to call out some of those issues I think it is part of the design process, and we do know what some of them are. We verbally discussed them, but I think we'll more formally identify them next month.
Okay, well, I'd like to see much more clarity on how we're going to think this through, actually.
Yep. Fair, absolutely fair, completely.
Thank you, and sorry for being a grouch, but
No, there's a lot of interest. Obviously, everybody wants to know the details, but I also think we don't want to rush and not have the proper information at hand for this. So it'll be an iterative process. And, as we've said before, if we need more and additional meetings to go through some of the details, we'll do that as well.
Okay, but I just want to caution us against being too concerned about getting into the details, because what I'm also saying is there are fairly major policy decisions. I mean, Pamela Dritt, we could be talking about what is our real goal here if we could do it. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to just cover everything on the roofs? Are we trying to cover as much as possible to deal with Article 51? I mean, these are big issues that we need to tee up. And we don't have to wait for everything, I guess is the point.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. Right. And we're keeping it in mind with our strategy. Right. So we'll have.
I think it's unfortunate if the board is behind the public who's already, trying to push us on this stuff,
Yeah, well, we're committed to building the project. So, and, solar, optimizing it and maximizing it is part of our strategy. So again, we'll have some of that discussion next month. So.
Okay, thanks everybody. And again, apologies for being grumpy.
No, got it. You're just passionate. We're all passionate about it, so that's okay. All right, so I'm going to move on. We're going to switch this agenda just a little bit. Dave, do you want to give the broadband update at this point?
Yeah, I already gave that.
Okay, all right. And one more. Okay. All right, so the next agenda item is really a vote that we're required to make. Dave is currently on the board of E&E, and every 3 years we're required to support a vote to have him continue his 3-year term or the next 3-year term. So I have language that the board needs to vote on, and so I'd like to read the language for that vote and then ask that board members make a vote to that effect. But before I read that language, do people have questions for Dave around the E&E board and his participation? The question to the board.
At some point, I would like to know what the board gets paid.
Or doesn't get paid.
Or doesn't get paid. That's interesting too, because I think it came up, and it's just a point of information. I came up when we were voting on, I guess, other board members for a while ago.
The directors.
Board of the directors, and I think Alice raised the good question: what is the compensation to the board of directors? And that I would love to know at some point. And I guess that's different from your role, right, Dave?
Yeah, I represent Concord. We're an equity owner in Energy New England, and I currently sit on the board. There's a number of other MLPs that are owners as well. And then we have members that aren't owners. And so every 3 years, the owners, which their directors are Class C members, need to be re-upped. And so in this particular case, we're looking for the board to vote to have me continue my director's role on the E&E board. And then assuming that happens, then the town manager will sign off on it. It'll get sent to the president and CEO of E&E, and we'll continue moving forward.
So let me read the language that we're going to vote on specifically. It's very specific. Okay. So the vote is that pursuant to section 3.2 of the operating agreement of the Energy New England LLC, the town of Concord town manager hereby reappoints David Wood as a Class C director of the Energy of New England LLC Board of Directors for a term of 3 years. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve that language for a vote.
I move that we approve the language for the vote.
Okay.
Can somebody just tell me what Class C means? Is that an owner on the board or operator on the board? Is that what Class C means?
Yeah, it represents the equity owners. The Class C are the equity owners. One.
Okay, that's what I assumed. I just wanted to check. Thank you. I'll
Oh,
second them.
Oh, and
Okay,
may
so-
I just add to that? So Dave, I gather what you're saying is that the board of directors that we voted for before, which were the subject of Alice's question about compensation, is a different class, shall we say?
Correct. So you have the equity owners that have directors, right? And there's a number of those, and then there's 3 outside directors. And those are the ones that you voted 2 of those a couple months ago to consider
Okay.
the outside directors.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so just to reiterate, I heard Pam move the motion, and Alice, I think I heard you as a second.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, so I'm not seeing any hands. I'm gonna make a roll call vote. Gordon,
Aye.
Pam,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
and Wendy's and I, so unanimous vote. So thank you all for that. Dave, congratulations on your reappointment to becoming. I know you'll take that and get the town manager to move forward. Okay. So with that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the meter replacement project. Dave, do you want to kick this off? I think, Brian, you may have some feedback as well.
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and Laura, feel free to add in if I miss stuff.
Okay,
And,
great.
you know, from your perspective as a reviewer, I think it'd be helpful to hear from you as well. But you know, we're moving forward with the project. We received 9 RFPs, which was pretty healthy. Our consultant went through them, and 3 did not meet the mandatory requirements. So, you know, we don't have to review those 3 proposals. With that said, we have 6 proposals to review, and it's quite a bit of work, to say the least. We have a reviewing team that includes employees from the water department, as they have an interest in this as well. Includes Joe Repoff, the assistant director, Laura Scott, power supply and rates administrator, Carol Hilton, customer service administrator, myself, Brian Folds. So it's a big group. It also includes our consultant. You know, we have a matrix ranking that everyone's going through, and then we'll get together and look at where everyone landed on it. The goal would be to bring a short list of folks in for presentations. So we're maybe just me, but I'm hoping that we end up having 2 or 3 consultants in that kind of are leading the pack and get presentations from them. So that's kind of my summary of it. Laura, do you want to add anything that I might have missed?
I might just add that in addition to the reviewers that you mentioned, who will be reviewing all aspects of each of the responses, we do also have specialists who are reviewing particular parts of the RFP, such as Jason Bolger, our CIO, is going to be reviewing the security and network design and architecture type details associated with these. So we are, and the meter folks are going to be reviewing the specifics of the exact metering details. So it's a very big group of folks who are going to be helping us to evaluate these proposals. And some of them are with appendices over 500 pages long. So they're pretty comprehensive responses to our RFP, but we have some good companies. So I'm really excited that I'm hoping that, you know, since we got such a healthy response, that we are going to be able to get, you know, the best of the best out there and do a good job of making a determination of which best fits our needs.
That's
Yeah.
great.
The only thing I would add is that this is the start of the review process. So there's no results, but the reason that 3 of them didn't meet the minimum requirements was mostly because they couldn't back up the price proposal that they provided being the final price of the project when completed. So that's a good reason to disqualify a proposal. And I was happy to see that they have to stand behind their proposals and not hide things in the fine print for costs later on when we've already bought in.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Which
Alice,
was
I see your
exactly
hand
something that-
raised.
which is exactly what we've dealt with in the past, what Brian was referring to. So
Okay,
it was a major concern from the start, and it was good that it was identified.
great. Thanks. Alice?
I'm wondering whether any of these presentations will be public. Will other people be allowed to listen in and just hear what the presentations are on the approach without listening to any of the dialogue or back and forth on the pricing issues?
Generally, the presentations are not public presentations. We've done it that way. Not saying we can't, but we'd look at it a little bit more in detail. It's usually done with the group of reviewers, and then we kind of move forward from there.
Okay. Gordon?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. I'm just, this is very encouraging, and I'm just curious if David or Laura, or even Brian, one of you wants to say whether or not it seems like as if these proposals tend to cover most of what we're looking for, or are we going to end up with a situation where if we're asking for A, B, and C, only some offer A and B, and others offer B and C, and you're not going to get A, B, and C in any one of the offerings. So is the coverage seem to be pretty good?
So I'm not all the way through the
Yeah.
Okay.
It-
so I
it's a
can't
bit-
answer that right now.
Yeah, it's a bit too early in the process. I mean, I've only read one complete proposal. They are hundreds of pages. So
Sure.
we received them a little less than a week ago. So the process has just started. By
Okay.
the next meeting, we'll have a lot more information.
Where I'm coming from with that was just a question I think Laura put out a while ago about how badly we need demand response. And because that could feed into this evaluation. So, but it's okay. I don't need the answer today.
Great. Well, it sounds like it's an immense amount of work, and I know there was a lot of work getting the RFP ready, and now getting the responses back, and it's just, I can tell it's a lot of detailed review that needs to happen. So thank you in advance, Brian, to you and Laura and Dave, the whole team. There's probably 50 people behind the scenes looking at the RFP. So I know it's a lot of work, and we'll look forward to hearing more as it progresses. So thank you.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, Wendy, is this is the largest review team we've had on any
Yeah.
project in my history. And
Yeah.
we were covered from all different angles, which is great. Laura mentioned we have the people that are sections, which is great, in their field of expertise. But it is a large review team, a lot of eyes on it. And one of the things that I would add, is, was asked about public presentation. Some of the stuff, it's quite possible there'll be NDAs and we won't be able to put some of it public. So some of that stuff is yet to be determined, but it has been the case in the past as well. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Well, good luck with your reviews. Looks like it's going to be a lot of work. So, all right. Moving on our agenda. Next topic is our fiber broadband completion task force update. Gordon, I know you are our main contact to that committee. Do you want to provide an update?
Yeah, sure. First, I just say in the last meeting, David, I asked for some assistance from staff for some information about streets that the GIS data shows are not covered. It's possible that some of that GIS data isn't actually perfectly accurate. It's about 50 streets that we have questions about.
Yeah, so I'll be in touch with you, Gordon, later this week about that, and we'll get you the information you need. Sorry for the delay, but that will be coming for sure.
Okay, sure. And just to give you guys an idea of what the pace of events or schedule is on our side, we're going to try to get some kind of first draft of what we're talking about at the end of this month, and then a review draft at the end of March, and a final draft at the end of April for a May 1st target. And we're trying to respect the staff time for this, and also respect the time of this board. I mean, the board is busy, so we're not going to necessarily ask for a lot of input, a lot of your time on this. If we can come up with something that's a report that can be circulated, then you all have a chance to see what we're talking about offline. And so another topic came up, and this is spurred by there's a portal where the residents can contact the task force, and Mr. Winters of Stacy Road wrote to the task force saying that he doesn't have a fiber at his house. He doesn't have access to Concord Broadband, but that he was aware of a paving project that was planned, and he wanted to know if there's any way they could get that in before the streets get repaved, because, you know, after that, then installing the fiber would involve digging up a perfectly a beautiful new street. So it suggests a greater issue of, like, is there any way that fiber could be just fiber rollout, not necessarily the whole service, or not necessarily electric, could be somehow planned along with the process of choosing streets for repaving. And examples would be like Alfred Circle, Ayrshire Lane, Madison Drive, Old Mill, maybe Autumn Lane, Pheasant Lane. That Pheasant Lane is near the town line, and town line areas have their own problems in terms of access. So I guess this email thread that I saw confirmed what I already expected is the case, is that obviously the town talks to each other, right? So Public Works, so people do know what's going on. So David, I guess that's a very big, broad question and a specific question wrapped up into one. I guess basically my question to you is there any way to try and see what streets are going to be done and do some fiber while we have the chance?
So we are in coordination with Public Works on their projects. We have been for years. We try and coordinate conduit work and, water work and drain prior to a road being paved. In a lot of cases, it's part of the conversion project, overhead underground conversion. And as the board knows, we collect, maybe $120,000 a year in the surcharge from MGL 166. That can only be used for underground conversion. So when we go out and do that, that's great. But right now we have about 6 or 7 miles of conduits in the ground without electric supply in there. So that's the focus of getting those areas converted. When a project like this comes up, it becomes a funding issue. So if it's an area that's going to be paved and it's overhead, we can put the fiber on the overhead line still. If it's underground, then we have to put conduit in. And so one of the challenges we've had over the years is, how do we fund the fiber conduit? It's a very small business. It's been profitable for a couple of years now, but we don't have a lot of funds in depreciation that would handle capital expenditures like that. And that's been the barrier for us in areas like that. It's probably our biggest challenge in what the task force is looking at, is funding to actually put conduits in areas that don't have them. So that's our biggest challenge. It shouldn't be a surprise, but that is the case.
Yeah, and thank you, Dave. In a way, I kind of want to take a step back and just say, I totally appreciate the work that you're doing. I think that the fact that there is even this warrant article in last town meeting saying, hey, broadband, could you extend it out to all the other neighborhoods, blah, blah, is actually, it sounds critical. Sounds like, hey, how come you guys aren't doing better? But it wouldn't even be possible if town broadband weren't doing as well as it is. So there's kind of a tension. I don't think that warrant article was actually meant as necessarily a criticism of what staff is doing or what the board is doing necessarily. Kind of, it's just anyway. I want Concord to be a great place to work, and So I definitely appreciate what's going on. And I understand that there are limitations on resources, which brings me to the last thing. If you'll give me just one more a second to talk here, and that is that there is an opportunity to get some new funds that could maybe be useful for solving this problem, and that is that it's called the American Recovery, the ARPA. I forget what it stands for. It's a federal funding that's coming in. The town stands to receive $5.6 million, and for a set of projects, including broadband. There's some other things. There could be bonuses for staff or police officers or whatever that were impacted by the pandemic. So there's it's one of these things that may seem like a lot of money, but if everybody makes a claim on it, it disappears really quickly. There's kind of, one of the great things about using this money on telecom is that would be putting it into a productive, a return, something that can return, provide a rate of return. It'd be an investment that can pay back and pay the town dividends. But on the other hand, when we've been going through the list of underserved streets and areas, one of the other things has been multi-dweller units, things like Concord Green or Everett Garden. These are hard cases. There are a number of reasons why it's hard for us to actually provide service there. So maybe actually using the money to put it into, to extend service to the places that are kind of sort of lower on our list might actually elevate them up and get some projects done that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. Anyway, it's just an opportunity. So we could extend the footprint, get the grid, increase the size of the grid. We could maybe do something like at Everett Gardens, low income, maximize return, helps do the solve case. Anyway, February 3rd, there was a select board meeting run by Terry Ackerman, where a number of ideas were proposed, and broadband was on the list. So there's an opportunity there. There may be some other opportunities, including for the light plan itself. So anyway, I don't know if that's a question. I just wanted to let you guys know that there's that opportunity, and the town is working on trying to sort out what's the best use. And unless you wanted to say anything, David, that's all I have.
No, I think, ARPA funds is an option. But as you said, there's a lot of competing interests for those funds. And honestly, $5 million is not a lot of money when you're talking about infrastructure like this. So if we got a piece, we'd have to strategically think about where we were going to use the funds. But it is, it sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about conduit installation, it's not a lot.
Oh, and one idea that the task force has been playing with is the idea of establishing a revolving fund, and we could seed it maybe $300,000 or something like that with the ARPA money, and then if it can be replenished as we use it out of operations. Anyway, that's all I had.
Thanks, Gordon.
Can I just
Dave,
comment on
can
that
I
real
ask you
quick?
to comment on one thing? So in terms of, at town meeting, there's always a plan for the streets and what's being renovated and repaved. Do we collaborate with I know we collaborate with Public Works on that, but do we have a sense of when that planning happens, and could we anticipate what the potential need is to support installation of conduit? I'm just to this point about funds and needing funds. We could project where we know we're ripping up the road and where we're short on funds to support fiber install.
Yeah, we can certainly get this plan, the road plan for the next 5 years, and kind of put some numbers around it to kind of show what it would be. That's something we could do. We haven't done that yet. But it is something that could be done.
Yeah, just, as the committee's looking at opportunities, that seems like one from a planning perspective that could be understood. And if there's funding needed, potentially, it could go to town meeting as well.
The The only other comment I'd have on what Gordon just said is he's talking about a revolving fund, and describing is actually what a depreciation fund does. So you collect 3% of the revenue and put it in a fund that can be put back into the system as capital assets. And that's a fund that isn't very strong right now on the telecom side. We obviously have that. If you look at the budget for the electric side, that's a huge item for us. 3% goes into the system. We continue to improve the system. That would be the goal of where you want to go, but we're challenged by revenue right now on that. So, but it is a good point, Gordon. And we certainly acknowledge that, but that's what a depreciation fund is for.
Great. Pam?
Just quickly, what is the official role of the light board on the report of the task force? First of all, I think Gordon, kudos to you. You're doing a lot of work on this, and it sounds like your presence on the task force is our official presence. But I'm just wondering, is it expected that the draft report will come officially to our board and we will be asked to comment on it? I'm just curious if there's any expectation about more engagement on the part of the board other than Gordon's wonderful engagement and the updates that we get in our casual comments. If there's a official role, I just want to know if that's going to.
I think that's what I kind of tried to describe a second ago, which is that we're going to have releases, so to speak, a first draft, second draft, and so forth, and we'll make those. We'll share that with everybody as we go.
No, but my question is, what is there an expectation that the light board will actually affirmatively comment on these drafts or not, other than you, Gordon, which I think would be totally sufficient? But I want to know whether we will eventually be saying to each other, "Oh, we have to set a set of comments" or something.
That's up to you guys. If you want to provide comments, we'll definitely listen to them. And I'm representing you guys here, so I certainly want to know what you believe. And I've been talking to David too, and particularly I've said, "Hey, David, we've talked about A, B, and C. I'd like to know if right off the bat A, B, or C are really completely stupid ideas and we should cross them off. If they are, I'll internalize that and bring that back to the task force and make sure that we don't head down some kind of dead end, because there's no point in writing a report that is immediately rejected either by this board or by staff. We want something to be in the real world.
Yeah, Dave, Gordon, I have no point of view on this at all. I'm very supportive of everything you're doing. I think we're devoting a lot of board resources in doing this. I just have just a procedural question. Is the board going to be expected to comment officially on the task force report in addition to all the wonderful work you're doing? I have no point of view on it. I just want to know if we're going to be expected to do that.
So can I just chime in here? Gordon, you said there were literally 3 opportunities to comment. And I know Mark has his hand raised and we'll get to him in just a minute. I do think that as a board, we should all review whatever draft at what point in time you think is appropriate and provide feedback to you. Whether we have a discussion at a meeting, I'm not sure. Might depend on timing, but that would be my desire, to make sure that we do have an opportunity, but to pick one of them, because we don't need to review it 3 times. So if that would help. That makes sense. I assume everybody
wants
to read it. Okay. All right. Okay, so what maybe I should do right now is turn it over to Mark, who as the chair of the committee might have some comments to share that would be relevant. So Mark.
Thank you. Just briefly, the charge from town meeting was that the task force would develop recommendations, and the expectation is that the report will include recommendations and potentially alternative recommendations. For example, the conversation you just had where Dave was mentioning that a depreciation fund or a revolving fund or even just a capital budgeting for fiber are all potential long-term opportunities. So the whole point of the task force's work is to put some some detailed options on the table that the light board, probably assisted by the finance committee and maybe even the select board, depending on where the area is, can adopt these as policies. So we're really acting as a resource to you. Our expectation is that we'll provide each draft as we publish it, so that there'll be an opportunity for community comment and comment from the board. And clearly, if you want to schedule time to take a formal position, we'd be more than happy to work that into the idea. The one thing that Gordon didn't mention is that we did extend the terms for the task force until June 30th. So what we're trying to work towards here is to have a report done by the beginning of May, so that there's a time period before the task force disbands where, you know, any level of dialogue can take place under the context of what the formal recommendations are in the various areas that have to do with the broadband business. So please let us know how you'd like to handle it, and we're really hoping that this will be a collaborative process.
Great. Mark, do you envision having, I know your committee is public anyways, but are you expecting or anticipating any sort of public forum to review the recommendations?
Yeah, we're talking about when we can get that. We'd like to obviously have the whole set of issues kind of laid out in a way that structures those comments for feedback, but absolutely. One quick thing, Gordon referred to a meeting that was held by the select board. That meeting was actually on January 31st, not February 3rd. And that recording is there. And it was a very good public session. And it's early in the process on the decisions about how ARPA funds might be available. But I'd encourage anybody with an interest in that topic to go watch the recording of that meeting.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, we'll look forward to future drafts. And Gordon, if you want to, you implied there might be one at the end of February. I don't know if that's real.
Kind of doesn't exist yet, so that'd be a stretch. We're working on it.
Okay. All right. Well, you should, I think, feel free to share documents that you think are appropriate to be shared at the right time.
Okay.
And we'll give you feedback. So
Thanks.
thank you. All right. Well, we're still on time, which is great. So thank you all. I'm going to move forward. We're going to move forward now into our discussion on the rate design philosophy. And I know all of the board members did receive Laura's memo. And as I said earlier, we were hoping to start the discussion today around our current tiered structure. Many of you are familiar with that already, but as you know, in our strategy, we've been talking about moving toward a time of use design as an alternative to the tiered structure. And I don't know how we want to start this conversation. We've had many conversations on this already. Laura has put a lot of information together, just quickly summarizing the current strategy. One of the discussions I know that we've had in the past has been whether we believe that our tiered structure really encouraged conservation or not. And that has been sort of a little bit in contrast to the need to encourage carbon-free alternatives to energy, which would by nature increase use of electricity. So they're obviously counter to one another. The other topics that we have raised in the past as a concern are the potential, as we move to a time of use and not having a tiered structure, would there be a negative impact to those users who are lower income, because presumably the lower tier ratepayers may pay a higher rate, and then the higher ratepayers on the higher tier currently might be paying something less. So those aren't new topics for the board, but they're issues that we need to grapple with. As we go forward, and I don't know, Dave, I can put you on the spot here. As we think about our tiered structure, our goal originally was to encourage conservation. Some of the research implies that maybe that didn't happen, but I think there might still be some, but I don't know what our original goals were for encouraging conservation. And I don't know if it's the end of the world that we didn't get that change in behavior that we wanted. So can I ask you, Dave, just to comment a little bit on those topics?
So the tiers were put in place to promote conservation, as you said. I don't want to say we haven't had any success with it, but it's very hard to, measure, right? Have additional load come on, things of that nature. So the idea behind it, I think still is a fairly solid idea. Where if you're going to start using more and more, you're going to pay more. The challenge we face today is exactly that. We're promoting electrification. So as you put heat pumps and EVs and whatnot, the tiers, those customers are going into the upper tier, but they're actually, participating in programs we're promoting. So that's one challenge that we have. Now, if this was, 10, 15 years ago, where we're trying to get people to use less electricity, tiers make sense. So it's a challenging topic, and what the right direction to go in is something that we really need to look at and figure out. But so for me, I don't want to say there hasn't been any conservation through the tiered structure. It's just very hard to measure. Yeah, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Gordon?
Isn't there kind of a corresponding idea with tour, which is that we're using a high daytime rate and a low nighttime rate in order to influence behavior? So if that's true, if you accept that, then it would be inconsistent to say that these incentives do work for time of use, but don't work for conservation. So it's like, I'm sort of inclined to say, to my view is that it's hard to prove anything. I think that if you accept one, you have to accept the other.
Do you mind if I share my views with
Brian, yep, sorry.
Yeah. So right now, we don't have the technology to do time of use in the R1 rate. We don't have the metering. So these discussions about should we do tiers or time of use are kind of a false lead, because we can't do time of use. The issue that I have with tiers is I've talked to many people who have considered heat pumps or EVs or things like that. And one of their big concerns in the process of purchasing or investing into these technologies is, oh no, I'm going to hit that upper tier and I'm going to pay the highest rate for electricity. This is working against our efforts to get people to adopt electrification as a clean energy source, because it is far cleaner than gasoline or home heating fuels. The tiered system as it stands now is essentially the same as we've had before, in the sense that it collects on the total amount of energy consumed over the monthly period. It doesn't, the reason to use time of use is because we can take those peak expenses and narrow the time frame during the day to increase the cost when those expenses are calculated. And so the tiers don't do that. What they do is they put fear of increasing my electric bill from fuel switching and prevent people from adopting those technologies. They have existed for a while, so there is established norms around, the higher users are used to paying that tier 3, and most of them probably have never noticed it. The lower users are used to not paying that higher tier, so they will feel that when there is a change. So a transition plan to a single price for transmission and capacity over the monthly period is, I think, needed until we get to the point where we're implementing meters and able to do an actual time of use that puts those expenses around when they're calculated, which is the best solution. So I suggest that going forward, we try to taper off our use of tiered rates until we can eliminate them to a single cost for transmission capacity. And then we'll transition to time of use. I think that's the path forward I'd like to see.
And Brian, thank you for acknowledging when we're having these rating discussions, they're a little more strategic. Some things can be done now, and obviously the time of use, our whole new meter infrastructure, it wouldn't be reasonable to implement that full time of use structure till it's there. So, you know, we haven't said when. I think what we're talking about here is strategically the approach, and then we'll have more discussions on the how and then the when as well. But all good discussion. So thank you. I think you pointed out effectively that the tier structure is not really addressing that specific time of use and the peak demand cost. So Alice, saw your hand raised.
Thank you. I really am sorry that I can't talk to you in person here, but broadband isn't working in this conference center. So I have a couple questions, and I appreciate Brian's comments. So the first is, I know that Concord isn't the only light plant that is grappling with this issue. When tiered rates came in, it was pretty much a widely accepted approach to setting rates, that this would be a deterrent for those to save energy. I've looked at a bunch of those. Wait, maybe I'm wrong. Dave is shaking his head no. But the light plants that I've looked at, most of them have tiered rates, and they were developed at about the same time for similar purposes, with the idea of conserving electricity. So maybe that's not right, and David, you can say something in a minute, but let me just suggest that the conversation is a difficult one, because as Brian pointed out, as we electrify, we will be using way more electricity than we have in the past. Now, some of those costs are going to be an offset from what we would have been paying for oil or gas. But our lifestyles and work styles have changed dramatically, and COVID has taught us that we no longer, most of us, don't go to the office to work, which means we are using our electric heating systems during the day, where you really don't have an option to offset to a lower tiered or time of use strategy, because now we're working at home, our lights are on, our computers are going, our heat is on. So I just want us to be cognizant, it's not just a rate question, it's a lifestyle question of how we lead our lives. That could change as we emerge from where we are with COVID and our lifestyles go back to working in downtown locations, but we may never get there. We don't know that yet. I think there was one more point I was going to ask. Oh, as the Baker-Tilly report had suggested that we transition to higher meter fees, which we have done. We increased our meter fees, which would be a cost equalizer for the fixed costs of the light plant. And I know we had decided at one point that the cost of $75 a meter fee seemed extraordinarily high, that we would do a slower transition to offsetting what would be considered fixed rates into our meter fee, which may have some impact in on the long-term rate strategy that we propose. So I just want to acknowledge that that was in Baker-Tilly, and we have it on our agenda to be cognizant of a strategy where we would offset additional fixed costs. That's all I wanted to offer. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. That's really helpful. It's hard to have any of these topics in isolation. So just want to respect that we need to at least have some focused conversations. But you're right, the fixed cost is an element of that, the residential demand fee topic that Laura had identified. So we will be having that conversation as well in the future. Alice, you mentioned a question around the municipalities and tiered rates, and I'd like to ask Dave just to comment on that, because we do know municipalities use tiered rates, but do you want to comment further, Dave, around the evolution of the market to time of use locally or nationally?
Yeah. So there are other MLPs, utilities, and co-ops that have tiered rates. It's not the norm. It's the exception. So there are some out there, but I think I would categorize it a little different than Alice did and say there are MLPs, utilities, and co-ops that have tiers, but there's fewer that do than don't.
Thank you. That's helpful. Gordon?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. I'll just double down on something I said a second ago, but it's actually triple down, and that is that the question is whether or not conservation is improved by tiers. We're using differential pricing to influence usage during the day, right? So that'd be instance where we endorse a belief in the effectiveness of differential rates there. The other thing is I think it was Brian that just mentioned a second ago, the impediment to electrification that the accelerating tiers represent. So that's a third case where we believe that differential pricing is important. So, to the extent that we can kind of like address an issue and consider it solved and not return to it again, I propose that we actually internalize as a group the idea that, yeah, actually prices do have an effect on behavior. I'm saying that even though I don't know it's true, but we have reason to think it should be. And even if it isn't true, it seems like the right thing to do. So that was one point. And let's just not keep returning to the question of whether or not conservation really works. It's like, look, we're using that notion for these other things. So let's just buy it. It's not the end of the world one way or the other anyway, but it also saves us time, okay, in terms of mind space and revisiting. Just one other thing, if I can bring it to mind. Oh, okay, is this, that I've been very passionate about my belief in the fairness of tiers. But let me just say that I think that the idea that larger users should pay more to support the system than smaller users, I'd compare that actually to the way that we pay for schools, based on an assessment of property, and the properties that are assessed at higher values end up with a larger property tax, and they pay a bigger part of the costs of running the town and paying for the school. So there is a precedent there. What I'm trying to say is that the tiers are just a more extreme version of the general notion, which is that bigger users should pay more of the cost of operating the light plant than smaller users. Of the two, as far as what I care about, I think that just the idea of larger users paying more is more important to me than the accelerating tiers are. And actually, if you do the math, it's just the fact that it's based on volume is more important than exactly what the volume price is. I have one other thing, and that is to say that there's a case to be made. I'm not perhaps the best one to advocate for this because I don't really fully embrace it, but that, gee, if we moved all of the overhead off of volume and onto a meter fee, then that would help electrification. It would mean that we could get rid of the solar distribution charge. It would mean that I think there's a industry term called decoupling, which is the idea that we assure investors in generation or in distribution that, look, you don't have to worry about conservation efforts. You don't have to worry about solarization, whatever, that we're going to guarantee that your investment is made whole. And it's just a little different, though, to apply that idea to Concord, because we own the plant. It's not like one party trying to, or one party trying to stick it to the other party. We've all got something shared here. It's a little different than when you're having a conversation across the table, a negotiation with a profit-oriented enterprise that if they make some money, it's at your expense, a zero-sum game. I'm sorry, that wasn't very clear. Those are my points. I'll turn it back to you guys.
Okay. Brian, I see your hand raised. You want to comment further?
Yeah, so Gordon did bring up a good point about the reason that, and I'm paraphrasing your comment, Gordon, I hope I get it correct. The reason you like tiered rates is because higher consumers of electricity pay more to support the light plant's operation. The concept of tiers in the meter charge, that fixed monthly fee makes more sense if we had data on the size of connections for every customer. So do you have a 100 amp panel? Do you have a 400 amp panel? Do you have 3-phase? I don't believe the light plant has that information in a billing system that they could correlate. So that may not be an option. But I do agree with Gordon that those that are larger consumers of electricity should support more of the cost of operating the plant. I don't feel that should be done within the collection of capacity and transmission. I think that the solution is the time of use model that will be coming. In the interim, I think we should get back to a single price for capacity and transmission. So the idea of tiers within the meter charge may hold, have that concept that Gordon likes of people who use more, pay more, be done. But I think there's technical barriers to doing so. And I brought this idea up at a meeting like a year ago. And so I know that the data about each customer's, line drop to their house and the size and scale of that is not something easily accessible. So I can't.
I'm interested in
more
that
problems.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in the idea. Anything that we could, so something similar to the property tax, that the big users pay a bigger chunk of, and you know what? If you're drawing more power, you are actually making a bigger impact on the operation of the plant, right? It's like they're gonna have more. If everybody used more power, then all of a sudden there'd be more what do they call it? Transformers and thicker lines and bigger service and so forth. So there are impacts of, and like you said, Brian, that actually in a way relates to the size of the service, not necessarily what your usage is, but just that they know that since you've got a big pipe, or the light plant ought to know that if you've got, I have 200 watt service. I don't know, you probably have more than that, Brian. I'm sure there's some houses with, okay, there you go, 400 watt service. That there was an engineering effort on the back end to make sure that Concord was able to actually supply you with 400 amp service. And that, that's the size of the system. So,
and that could determine the amount of my meter fee. Whereas someone with 100 amp service may have a quarter of the meter fee that I do. And something like the hospital would have a very large meter fee because they have switch gear and a much more complicated connection.
yeah.
And if you take all of that together, it accounts for, the $4 or $5 million it costs to operate the plant itself. And that way that the transmission capacity fees don't have the tiers. We don't have the concern about people trying to avoid hitting that upper tier and not doing the fuel switching that we're desiring them to do. Yeah, it's a good solution, but again, the key issue is the light plant doesn't have data on every customer about their line drop and the scale. So yeah, I think Laura has a comment on that.
So Laura, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up as a possible solution to the problem you guys are raising, where you're right, we don't have the data on the service drop size for every customer, but data that we do have that we could use if you decided that high users should pay more is a demand fee, whether it be on a coincident or a non-coincident basis. That is data we can get when we get the time of use meters. That's something we're looking for as a minimum requirement in the new equipment. So we will have the capability to measure that. That has its own issues because, again, the people who are doing beneficial electrification, like charging cars and heat pumps, are going to end up paying more. And is that appropriate? I think what Gordon's saying is he kind of wants the charge to be based on wealth rather than maybe electric use. I don't know, but the demand fee could be used as a solution.
Thanks, Laura, because I was hoping you would say that. And then Gordon, can you just clarify, is it really, I don't know if it's the wealthier customers, but it really is the larger customers who are causing that larger spend, correct?
All right. I don't want to sound like a socialist.
Yeah.
Right. And really, honestly, I'm pointing to values that I think are good old New England thriftiness and a sort of original notions of fairness. I'm not trying to import, you know, things that are much more radical than where I come from, right? I'm a centrist. I don't want to be attacking wealth, and you know, I don't resent people who have more money than I do, and I'm happy to say that I have more money than a lot of other people do. Let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about wealth.
I'll just comment from an economics perspective, because
What, Wendy?
Yep. Can we just wait? I will. My only comment on this is that I do believe that with those consumers who are causing us to invest further in the more alignment with the demand, that as an economic principle, those customers would normally pay more. I mean, just as an economic principle. So has her hand raised. Wait, Brian, let me just get to Pam.
No, I just, first of all, I don't want to weigh in on the wealth question, but I think that wealth is a very important component of the way we think as a society. And there are wealth issues right now in this particular society. But I won't go there. I would say that I'm sort of vaguely related is a question I have about the accuracy of the data or the utility of the data, to the extent, and this goes to wealth perhaps, that is it, and I'm asking this of those who are more savvy than I am, but I detect a kind of inelasticity in the town of Concord with respect to paying for certain things. And I think that electricity or power is, in an affluent town, it's not surprising to me that the demand would be in essence inelastic. So we wouldn't get a lot of differences in terms of the tiered structure. I'm just raising that as a possibility, that the tiering, I would not surprise me that the tiering isn't spitting out all sorts of difference. And I base that on my sense that the inelasticity of demand in this affluent town makes this sort of measure not that valuable. And I just sort of raise that to maybe, and partly in support of Gordon's earliest point, that it's hard to see what's true here. It's very, very tricky when you've got competing pieces of data or not enough, and sometimes we hide behind faux data because it just feels better. But I'm suggesting that we don't really have the data, and one of the reasons we might not have it for the tiered situation is the inelasticity of demand in this affluent town. I just raise that as a question, kind of. The other point, I just supporting the idea that I think if you lack sort of data, technical data to make decisions, sometimes impressionistic views are important. And I think Wendy expressed the point pretty well, that, and all of us have, I guess, that larger users sort of intuitively tell us that there's more strain on the system, and may tell us that larger users have the better capacity economically to pay for more as well. So I just digesting all of this and will require a lot of time. But I guess my takeaway is I wouldn't lean too heavily on the tiered data because of my inelasticity comment, and I also would be inclined to think that there is a relationship between the volume of use and the strain on the system. And I finally would say, not having thought about it too much, that I think the notion of a strategic approach with transitioning as we get more data, as we add in more data points, is a very wise way to look at all of this.
Just quickly, Pam, I'd also ask whether or not the tiers that are in place for water usage work or not. And I don't really know, but there are other penalties and fines and so forth, so that in that case, the water department is very clear. They don't want people running their sprinklers like crazy in the summer. So they'll have the tiers, they'll have outreach, and they'll have fines, and they'll do a bunch of things to try and reach people and change that behavior. And the question for us is that well, what's the behavior that we're trying to do. If on the one hand, we're trying to do beneficial electrification, on the other hand, we, have limited actual capacity to deliver power. And, there are actually physical limits, or there are limits in the marketplace. There are limits in the amount of renewable that we can get a hold of, or whatever. But that's sort of the first question is actually not a technical one. It's a strategic one. What are we trying to do here?
Thanks, Gordon. I see Alice and I see Brian, and I want to ask Laura a question first. So we've had this discussion around conceptually demand, but if we have larger customers demanding more use, more electricity, does a demand charge better align from a cost of service perspective, so that, because part of our philosophy is making sure that we're aligning our costs and our rates? Would a demand charge help address that issue more closely?
Yes, it would, particularly if we assess the demand charge on a non-coincident basis. Because so large users have a couple impacts on our system. One has been mentioned, the line drop and the distribution costs associated with a larger service, which is a smaller, I don't know the exact number, but let's just say a few dollars per kW range, okay, to pay for the distribution costs. Then you have the capacity and transmission impacts, which are much larger. They're over $10 a kW. Okay, so so there are two components. If we institute a demand charge for residential customers that is assessed on a non-coincident peak basis, then those who are using a lot of electricity during the hours that we are going to be assessed, those big charges, the over $10 per kW, they would share, a larger portion of that cost burden, because we're going to be measuring how many kilowatts they're using during that peak and then charging based on that volume, versus other folks who are maybe charging their car at night. So they're using a lot of electricity, but it's off peak. And so it's not contributing to our capacity and transmission charges. It might be contributing to the distribution, right?
So-
The larger drop at the house.
Laura,
Does that answer your question, Wendy?
I want to clarify something though, Laura.
Brian, I want you to wait just a second. I just want to clarify. So thank you for that. Now I just lost my train of thought. But I just acknowledging that the discussion around a demand charge is sort of another topic that we were going to talk about separately, but I just want to acknowledge that fact that it is a mechanism through which we could align these to the larger customer demand with our cost structure. So sorry, Brian, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Now.
I just want to clarify that we cannot do a residential demand charge today.
Right. This is a
And
strategic
so
one.
when we get the capability to do a residential demand charge, we're going to have the capability for time of use, which is where we would desire to do collection for capacity and transmission expenses. The demand charge would be for covering off on fixed charges. So we'd be using another variable measurement to collect for fixed expenses. Again, I'm very against demand fees for residents. I don't mind monitoring it and collecting the data in the new meter system. But I think residential demand charges can easily make, linking expenses to the way we collect very difficult.
So let me just ask one question. I do see some residents with their hands raised. I want to just, I don't know if today we're going to make a final decision on this, but this has been really good discussion. Can I ask the group, I think we have some big questions around transition, right? But assuming that we have meters in place, is the board still in support of moving toward time of use? Is there a concern here that's keeping you from thinking that we should do that? Seems like a silly question to ask at this moment, but I just want to reaffirm the board's support for moving toward time of use at this point, assuming we have to address all these other issues, not saying that they're easy. Okay, all right. let me ask one more question, because I think as part of this topic, if we are in support of time of use, we will also need to have a discussion around opt-out. And in the Baker Tilly report, we did ask them to identify how we might support an opt-out solution. An opt-out solution could be a fixed rate, it could be a time, it could also be a tiered rate.
Excuse me, Wendy, I'm sorry. Didn't we already establish an opt-out? We already established that rate.
We had a draft.
We didn't vote on a rate schedule, but we've gone through all of these discussions and outlined what we want.
I don't think.
I
it
think
was
that's
voted
right. I think we did. We have a draft as a result, right?
With no vote.
With no vote, right?
But we have an outlined path forward for something that will happen 3 years, 4 years from now.
Right, I'm feeling like we've already committed to having an opt-out. I'm just
Yes.
asking the next question of the structure of an opt-out. The opt-out today that we haven't voted on, and maybe actually, Dave, maybe next month we need to look at that opt-out policy again and formally vote if we didn't, because we knew we needed one, right? That is, and Dave, remind me, for the discussion on the opt-out, that we have drafted a policy, but we haven't voted.
Yeah, I think the sentiment was to have a time of use rate from the board and have an opt-out. And then the question was, what will that opt-out be? And that's what hasn't been voted on at this point. So it ties in with your discussion here today about tiered rates or a flat fee and that sort of thing. So that's what needs to happen next.
So if we have someone who, a customer who wants to opt out of time of use rate, I don't know if the options are really at some fixed rate or some tiered structured rate. Does the board have an opinion on those two options, or maybe there's another one someone has? Any discussion or opinions on that?
I just assumed the opt-out rate would be the existing R1, the existing residential rate structure with perhaps a penalty.
With
So-
or without tiers?
My assumption, that was my assumption too. You just,
And
No,
and the
so
reason for a penalty is
No.
that if you've got someone that is basically
Gordon-
would be gaming the system under their time of use, like they want to use all their energy at the very most expensive time of day, they realize if they go back to the opt-out that they can continue that behavior and save a lot of money. That's the reason why you'd have a penalty.
So Gordon, I got to push very firmly back on calling it a penalty. It is not a penalty. It is a cost to serve. So we had the discussion that it would cost over $20 a month to have a person drive out and manually read the meter. And we set the price at $20 as a flat fee to have that opt-out, because it didn't fully cover the cost of sending out the truck, but it would cover a significant amount of that cost. The other part of the time of use would be they would be charged a per kilowatt hour fee, and that would be measured over the month period. So there couldn't be, I mean, there could be the tiers in the R1, but there really can't be a lot of hourly, there's no hourly information there. So it would be something like an average cost per kilowatt plus this $20 manual read fee. So it's not a penalty, it's just a cost to serve for that special service.
All this conversation, I just wanted to revisit this.
I'm sorry, Wendy, what did you say?
No, I said we did have this discussion around an opt-out and having a fee that would cover the cost of the meter reading. And then in addition, there would be a rate. I had always assumed that it might be the current residential tiered rate as well. Just commenting.
It could be.
One comment here, just to emphasize Brian's point. I mean, penalty is a charged word, and I think Brian
Yeah, sorry
aptly
about
put
that.
it. It's yeah, it was really just try to capture the costs, and I think we were fairly conservative in the capturing, actually. Yeah.
I think you're correct. Okay. So, Gordon?
Uh, just to make a distinction, okay, now I do remember now what Brian was referring to, and this is really basically people who were opting out of smart meters, fear of radiation, privacy concerns and so forth. And I was really thinking of something else, which is that people look at the tier, I mean, the time of use structure and say, hey, that doesn't work for me. I want to go back to the way it was. Nothing to do with what kind of meter you're using. It's just what kind of rate structure you want. It's a different kind of opt-out.
It's still an opt-out. I read it as well.
Yeah.
Laura, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. After all this great discussion this morning, I just want to make sure we walk away with crystal clear instructions for us staff. Are you saying, I heard you say, okay, the board is in favor of time of use rates. Can you also definitively say at this time that you are disbanding, doing away with the tiers in favor of time of use, so that except maybe for the opt-out rate, which I'm hearing you want just to be like the current R1 rate schedule. Is that true? You know, I just want to make sure I understand after all this, what's happening.
So I think the idea of removing the tiers, I think we can agree on, but I think a transition period where over, because it's going to take 3 to 4 years before we have smart meter deployment. So that's when time of use will begin. And I think we need to have a plan to reduce our reliance on tiers over those 3 to 4 years, rather than abruptly go to a non-tiered rate.
I know I heard you say that, and Pamela as well, about a transition, but I have no idea what that would look like. Like it's almost like you're half in and you're half out. I don't, and I hear your desire, but I don't understand how that would be implemented. So I would need more direction on what you're thinking.
Can I just say something here? Because you just mentioned me. I was speaking very, very high level. I'm not endorsing transition in any granular way. I don't really understand how that would work. It seems like an appropriate thing to do if we're moving towards something, but we don't have the ability presently to implement it. But you should discount my endorsement as much more soft than it may have sounded.
I have a suggestion. I believe right now that it's 20-60-20. So the lower tiers are 20% of the collection, or I guess all the customers. Anyway, we have percentages related to the tiers. So I think reducing the extremes, the high and the low, such that less people hit the tier 3 and we give less subsidy for the tier 1, going towards the average in the middle over that time period. Does that make sense?
So you're just saying keep the tiers but flatten them.
Yeah, over a 3-year period.
Oh, and
Is there a
actually talking
benefit
about
to that?
transition, maybe what we'd want to do is flatten the tiers and then switch over to tour.
I don't know someone needs to explain to me what the value of doing that is. I don't quite understand
Yeah.
what
So
we
it
gain
avoids-
by a complicated pricing and rate strategy like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It avoids
definitely.
rate shock.
What,
You know,
Brian?
It avoids rate shock. So if we were to flatten them today, those in the upper tiers would see a big discount, and we would see that I think it was $6.50 a month added to every bill for the tier 1. So we don't want to make abrupt changes. That's all I'm suggesting, is to avoid rate shock.
Are people going to be shocked? I mean, I just think I get back to my inelasticity
Yeah.
point of view. I mean, I just don't. I think maybe we overvalue the sensitivity of the buyers, as it were, to these changes. I mean, you're not coming up with data that proves that. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just that, do we overstate all of this because we are in an, forgive me for keeping using this term, but we're in an inelastic place with this stuff generally. It's like salt. I mean, people have to use it, so they buy it, you know,
I'm gonna
and they
let
will
Dave
pay
answer
anything.
that.
So I think one of the things that I'm not hearing is, you guys are the rate setting authority and you have to be looking out for the ratepayers. And we have electric users that use a lot of energy because they're using electricity, but they pay attention to what the price is. And we hear from them. We have different groups out there. You guys have heard in the past from the ETS group, they're a high user, right? And that was a program that we promoted for years. And so whenever we do rate change, we hear from that group. And that's only one group. There's other groups as well. So I don't want to sit here and say that our ratepayers aren't paying attention to the prices and don't care, because they do. And we hear from them. So it's something that we need to keep in the back of our minds, especially for the board as you're setting rates.
Okay, then I would like to know what percentage of the people are I'd be curious how many of the users are clearly watching closely the rates. I mean, and if they are, that's fine. And I think it's wonderful if we have the ability to influence behavior based on rates. I'm a big believer in that. I'm just a little skeptical about that. And I would love to hear if there are X number of users, what percentage of those users are actually saying, watch it, I'm concerned about my rates. Also, I think we as a board have to determine whether we are, of course, we're interested in keeping rates down to a certain extent, but we also have responsibilities with respect to other values in the town having to do with greenhouse gas consumption and other things. So I think we have a dual responsibility. I am not, maybe we should have a conversation, but I don't think only about the lowest possible rate. I don't think that way. I think about externalities, and I think about the obligations that the town has to capture those externalities and to also meet its objectives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, and if I'm wrong about that, I think we need to talk about it.
I think we need to keep rates as reasonable as we can. It's not keep rates as low as you can, because this community has way more initiatives than many communities, and we do more. And our rates have come up. You see it in the surveys that I sent out. We're now up in the top quarter, but there's so much more behind what we do that's driving the rates, and they're going to continue to drive up as we do more. But I still think we need to try and keep things reasonable if we can.
Okay, I do one more thing. I just think, and I think maybe we need a larger discussion. I agree with you, but the whole question is, what is reasonable, and on what basis is something reasonable? And I, for one, it may sound outrageous, but I think that we highly underprice the cost to the globe on the energy we consume. And I'm speaking very broadly, but I think it's exactly the profile of towns like Concord that consumes the most of this stuff and has put the most carbon into the atmosphere. And so I have a much more complicated view of this than perhaps I should have. And if the rest of the board is on a whole different page, then, I would like to know about it. But I think we have an obligation. If we were number one in terms of how much we charge, it may be appropriate. I'm not saying it is, but I think reasonable is a word that, of course, needs interpretation. And I just want to put it on the table that I consider a lot more than perhaps some others do on this, and might take me to move to higher rates because of what I would call externalities, obligations, and the direction the town has asked us to go in, which is an aggressive greenhouse gas reduction agenda, I think. So just want to, and Wendy and others on the board need to tell me if we need to have a discussion about this.
We're already paying more because of our initiatives, right? We're purchasing racks. Part of our surcharge is about doing that. And we've been very clear with citizens that that's what would happen. And that's why our rates are higher, to Dave's points earlier. So I think you're spot on. This board is spot on. Part of our discussion next month around the strategic plan is also being mindful of all those other commitments that we're making as a town, right? And making sure that we're going to address those needs, and then make sure that the rates are aligned with our cost and we're charging appropriately. So So I'm going to need to sort of just stop here, stop the conversation. Laura, I know we didn't answer everything. I'm hearing a strong sentiment to move toward time of use. When is obviously a big question and is dependent on meters. I'm hearing support for our opt-out. And I think there was a general assumption that this was sort of tiered under the current structure. But I'll just also comment to the board that we have many more discussions to be had here. So this isn't the only discussion we're going to have, and we'll come back and revisit some of these, I'm sure, when we have other rate discussions. Your comment, Pam, around consumers sensitive to certain rates, we're going to be talking about that ETS rate. So remember, there are different rates for different customers, and those are some of the customers that are more vocal. So as we move to any new rate structure, we are going to have to understand impact to customers, right? We don't have the meters, we can't simulate it right now, but we'll have to work toward, as a board, understanding these impacts more closely. We know there's going to be impact. So Dave or Laura, any more comments at this point?
I just want to give an update. I'm not, Brian may be right. We're talking 3 to 4 years. I'm hopeful it's going to be more like 2 to 3. I think if we select our meter provider in March, lead times for some equipment is 18 months. So we're talking, the end of 23 to get our equipment and do installations maybe in 24. So that's sort of the time frame I'm thinking. And I do want to mention also, we do have the capability to do some of what we want in the interim on a pilot basis, because we have those smart meters that we bought in 2008 that can be deployed. We can't do it for all 8,500 residential customers, but we want to bring to you a proposal for a pilot on an opt-in basis where residential customers could say, yes, I want to try out this TOU and see how it works. And we would deploy one of the existing meters. We'd go out and swap out their current dumb meter, okay, for one of our smart meters, and then we could measure time of use for them. And we can also practice our billing and make sure it all is ironed out before we try to deploy this to the entire rate base. So we do have that capability. I just wanted to mention that.
And I think we discussed that as a board, and we all agreed that that was a really smart approach to figuring out, are we doing this in the right way? Our billing systems are up to this task of doing it this way. So I think that reiterates the commitment of the board to follow through on a pilot.
At this point, I would like to move on our agenda. This, by the way, has been a great discussion. And I think we've got direction that we were looking for. We're going to be having similar conversations on different rates. And I might suggest that our next discussion is around the demand, this question about residential demand fee. If the board thinks that's appropriate, it seems very close to this time of use discussion. So that might be more.
Wendy, I just want to make one amendment to what I said, because I just want you to know that in my calculations of anything like this, I would include equity considerations always. And so to the extent that I made a broad statement about our profile as a town and its responsibility, obligation, moral responsibility, as well as others to be aggressively attending to our greenhouse gas issues, I also think we have to include equity considerations all the time in everything we do. And I think we have the ability to factor those kinds of values in. Just wanted to make that point.
Great. And we've been doing that all along, so that's great.
Right.
Okay, I would like to open this conversation up to public comments. I don't think we have any additional liaisons. Comments to the public. Appreciate your patience. This has been a very deliberate opportunity to have open discussion. So, but I'll open up the floor. Mark, you've had your hand raised for a while.
Great, thank you. This is a really good discussion, and I encourage you guys. You can't possibly spend too much time on this. There's been a lot of good points made, so I'm going to attempt to contribute some new things to the discussion. Although I agree and to some extent disagree with many of the things. It's a critical time for you to be looking at your principles and the policies. The world is going to get more complicated, not less, over the coming decades. And unfortunately, the past is not likely to be a good guide. The dearth of data that the light board and the light plant currently have is a real central problem to trying to determine which way to go. So I'd encourage you to engage in a process that attempts to write down what principles and policies you're really looking to accomplish and be prepared to revise and revisit this. One size is really unlikely to fit all. So this discussion often becomes tiered versus time of use. But there's critical period pricing, there's seasonal pricing, there's how do you communicate with customers to impact their behavior. All of these things are extremely important to be designed in. And right now, while selecting an advanced metering system and the capabilities of that system in the broadest senses, those are the things that are really going to constrain the future. And so, you know, I know you're going to go in with a shopping list of we want everything. And frankly, that's kind of what you need to do. And at the very least, if you can't get everything right now, ask for something that's clearly able to be extended, to be modified, and to change as we start to see a more complicated electric grid. Implementing different use structures for different customer sets is already in place. As soon as you start having the opt-out discussion, you're acknowledging that it's going to remain in place. And so rather than treating it as an exception, it should be the design. The design should be that there are rationalized rate structures, whether they're block rates, tiered, flat rate, or time of use, that make sense from the light plant's perspective economically and for the customer, and then customers can choose that. With an advanced metering system, you're going to be able to model and predict for customers what their bills are going to look like based on that, and let them make those rational decisions. How engaged do they want to be with the light plant and their electric bill, or how disengaged do they want to be? Think about it in those ways, and then take all of that information into the selection process about the metering system. Because the data, once you have the data, that's the point at which to design. And so I'm really looking to you to return to what I think it was Pamela at the beginning of the meeting was saying. Think high level, think about the policies, think about the principles that you're pursuing, think about what those goals are, and get clear on those, and then use that lens to evaluate the details of what's available from the implementation. And by the way, to Laura's point about modeling, I already have a smart meter, I have an EV, I have air source heat pumps. I'm engaged in fuel switching on a daily basis because based on temperature, I go back and forth between my natural gas system and my electric system. So by all means, start looking at what a complicated user might look like, because you can get the data on my particular account on a 10-minute basis right now, and that might give some clues about what a customer is going to look like. It's just one example, but there are quite a few that others around town that I think might begin to give you at least enough to model. A sampling exercise of a few hundred customers could be very instructive and give you something to go on. So those are a few of my thoughts. I appreciate your discussion. Spend a lot more time on it, and then write down the progress so that others can start from the benefit of the information that you're already getting. Thank you.
Thanks for volunteering. Pamela Dritt, your hand's been raised for a while, I know.
It's all right. Thank you. And thanks for this excellent discussion. I agree. We need more of it because we haven't figured it out yet, I don't think. Although we've made great progress, and we have to design our rates to incentivize the kind of use we need. We need to nudge people. The best economic systems do that. If we don't make it, for instance, if we don't make it more expensive to opt out, lots of people will opt out because people don't like change. If they have an incentive, if it's cheaper to opt out, than to use the time of use rates, people will do that. You can easily make supports, discounted supports for needs-based discounted supports in a complicated system. And I think we should do that rather than worrying about low users and because some of the needs-based users aren't low users. They're renters, they have no choice. They should still have the option of getting financial discount help from us if we want to support people who can't afford it. You don't have to change the entire system for everybody. You can help the people that need help on top of the other system that incentivizes the majority of people to do what we need to do. Could we make a list of things we want to incentivize and design a rate system that does that? And can we use and fill the stabilization fund so we can use that to avoid rate shock? I think Brian is right. Rate shock is a terrible thing, which is why we should gradually raise our rates as we go every time. Right now, all the time doing it. We need to be more expensive than most places because we have 100% green energy here. That's a more expensive thing. And we have to build the infrastructure to make it completely green energy and mostly locally generated. We need to raise the rates to get the money to build that infrastructure for things like the middle school solar and the industrial battery we're going to use and the broadband build out and the electrification of the school bus fleet, which can be a mobile backup battery generator for the whole town. And we have, or we will have in the future, a local peaker plant consisting of residential solar arrays with battery backup that we could use to balance the local grid. We should reward solar with battery backup investments on the part of people, because that's investment in Concord power that we don't have to make and we don't have to buy. And the idea that solar installations are being disincentivized financially or limited in any way is so counterproductive for the general climate change things like Pamela said. And we also, I haven't seen anything about incentivizing battery backup investments. I think in our strategic plan, that doesn't include incentivization of solar really needs to be changed.
Opportunity to see that strategy and have that discussion next month because we're going to be revisiting that strategy. So all the points on incentives. So appreciate that feedback.
I understand the contradictory conserve electricity and switch to all electric with heat pump philosophy. That's contradictory in rates, but couldn't we solve that by making a different rate for all electric heat pump buildings?
So I think, Pamela, to your point about incentivizing the things that we want is appropriate. And that's why we're having some of these rate strategy discussions. So I think continue to participate and we'll appreciate it.
Only two more points. I'll try to make them.
Gosh.
There's some other people very quickly, please.
Well, please don't lower the charges during the transition for most people, because then we'll have more rate shock. We're used to paying what we're getting. Don't lower the charges, please, for the transition period. We don't know what our costs are going to be. And we know they're going to be more. Lower them after we've got all the infrastructure and all the stuff already in. Then let's lower them and reward ourselves. And I have a question. Since you did the charge point different time rates for charge point chargers for electric vehicles. It's worked on me. I only charge during the morning and the off-peak hours. Has there been a change in the general charging use of the charge points that way? Do we know?
Yes.
Yes, there has. I don't have the numbers in front of me, Pamela, but that's something we can review at a later time. But yes, there's definitely been a change.
Yay, we did it. That's it.
Mind if I move on? Dean, you've had your hand raised for a while.
Thank you. Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. I just want to alert the light board that I am introducing a warrant article at town meeting to try to get us back on the track of developing local solar. And so I've prepared a small statement. I'm going to read it, and hopefully it's not too choppy. I'm going to start by just reading the text of the article as it's written, and it'll appear in the warrant. And it's to see if the town will vote to urge the Concord Municipal Light Plant to develop an action plan and schedule for the achievement of the town's 2030 solar capacity targets, focused on development of new power generation on town-owned properties, and present the plan and schedule to both the Select Board and the FinCom before the end of 2022. In 2010, CMLP had a robust target to build 25 megawatts of solar capacity by 2030. We got off to a good start. We did the landfill in 2014 and WR Grace in 2017. And then in 2017, the same year we passed Article 51 to get aligned with the mass GHG reduction targets, CMLP changed course and distributed solar was no longer considered strategic, and solar deployments stopped. The 2020 Climate Action Plan revived the idea of creating local solar. And in there, as a measure of success, was a reduced target of 20 megawatts of local solar by 2030. So a primary goal of this article is to align CMLP's strategy and actions with the Climate Action Plan. If we are successful in reaching the 20 megawatt target, the added solar would be about 8% of our power portfolio. In the years since Article 51 aligned Concord and Massachusetts climate goals, the state has not stood still, and an emphasis on solar will help us support more recent state targets. As an MLP, I think we're exempt from most of those laws and regulations. So we could just continue with our REC purchases. This offloads the actual infrastructure impacts to others elsewhere. And it leads to the question, are we doing our fair share? Now, I get it that there are specific challenges we face. The downside of not being as heavily regulated is that we can't participate in many state incentives that investor-owned utilities that can get to create more renewables. And that makes the financial analysis a bit more challenging for us. I get it that our distribution network could be destabilized or could suffer blackouts from overproduction, especially during shoulder months of the year. But the benefits seem tangible, both financially and practically. Local generation would help cut CMLP's peak demand from the ISO, especially if married to a storage solution. And once flowing, solar electricity will be delivered at a stable long-term cost. I greatly appreciate the work being done to be able to open CMS in 2025 with a functional system. But there are other opportunities in town that could be built without having to wait for a site to be cleared and a building to be built. So this is another goal of the article, to back up and create a plan and a schedule for reaching the 20 megawatt target. And it seems clear to me that waiting until 2025 to deploy about 1.2 megawatts at CMS will fall short of our larger objective. The schedule needs to be more aggressive to be successful. We can get our sea legs on a building and or a parking area that's available now. And when it's time to build CMS, we will have worked out the financial model and the practical details on one or two other projects of similar scale. We all see the news of extreme weather events and with increasing frequency and severity. The planet is not waiting for us to build a new middle school, and I don't think we should wait either. That's my comment. I'm going to bring the article to town meeting, and I really appreciate Wendy's emphasis in the next monthly board meeting to revisit your strategy, because I think this might go well with that. So thanks, Wendy, for your putting that on next month's agenda. This will be reviewed at the select board hearing, and we'll have a presentation of it. So anybody wants to offer comments, that's kind of where I'm heading with this.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate it. We'll have lots more discussion, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, all right. I am not seeing any additional hands raised. And so I know that we're over time. Appreciate people's patience, but I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Second.
Thanks, Alice. All right, so roll call. Gordon,
Aye.
Pam,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
and Wendy agrees as well. So thank you all. This is a
Thank
great
you.
session. Appreciate all your time and your patience. Thank you all.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good discussion.
Yes.